authentic, inviting, life-changing, transforming. Here at Community U, we believe that these values live in each of us. Community U gives you the opportunity to learn from our experienced staff and faculty. Here at Community U, you will also experience a diverse and unique student body. Create long-lasting friendships in our study abroad programs. So, be authentic, be inviting, be life-changing, be transformed. Be Community U.
And what we want to do is we want to talk today and over the next couple of weeks about what that kind of community looks like if we're willing to be that vulnerable and that honest with one another. Because you see, that community really is identified by our ability to be authentic, vulnerable, trustworthy with one another, to be open with one another, to be able to walk in here and be able to say, you know what, if you ask me today how I'm doing, my answer may not be I'm doing good. My answer actually may be I'm not doing well at all. This is a bad day, or it's a rough day. And we should be the kind of community that says, okay, if you're having a bad day, then we're all just going to circle around you for a bit. And if you're one of the people having a good day, then that's a good thing, and we're going to celebrate. And the Bible tells us we laugh with those who laugh, we cry with those who cry, we celebrate with those who are celebrating, and we hug those and love those who are struggling. And that's what it means to be a community. But here's the problem. Most of us don't like that kind of stuff, right? I mean, we're not great at it. We're uncomfortable about it. We don't know whether we should approach somebody. We're not sure. And so most of us walk into a place like this and we see somebody else smiling and we think to ourselves, well, I need to smile too, right? I need to make sure that nobody knows anything's going on, that everything's okay, that I'm okay. And a lot of us walk into a place like this on a Sunday morning and we struggle in silence and loneliness because of the difficulties that are going on in our lives. And so we don't want anybody to know, when we're not sure that anybody really, really cares. They're just kind of asking to be sociable, right? But they don't really want to know my problems, and so we struggle in the middle of difficulties in silence. Our burdens, we carry those burdens in silence and loneliness. So if you've got your teaching notes out this morning, if not, this is a great time to pull them out, because that's our first note this morning. What we believe is that we give you these notes so that you can write things down. And that way, when you write them down, you remember them a little bit longer, right? It's better than, we know that by hearing things, we remember things about 72 hours after we've heard them. And then after 72 hours, it starts dropping off. But if we write them down, we remember them a lot longer. And so that's why we challenge you to write some of the key things down. So how are we going to be the kind of community that allows people to open up and get out of that silence and out of that loneliness and feel like they're a part of a family and a part of a community? So we're going to talk about that today and over the next 3 weeks following this. And I know that this is going to make us a bit uncomfortable because, you see, for most of us, what we really love to do is we really love to go home at the end of the day, we pull the blinds closed, we get a cup of tea, and we turn the TV on, and we just want to sit there, right? Calgon, make the world go away, right? Anybody remember those commercials? You know, we just want to say to the world, okay, I've had enough of you. I made it this far. I got through an 8-hour day. That's enough. I'm done. And community challenges us to reach out beyond our comfort levels. There, I said it, right? Comfort levels. Because we all have them. We all have these comfort levels when it comes to dealing and wrestling with other people, especially other people's problems. And if we're going to be a community, we've got to be okay with being a bit uncomfortable in order to be the family and community God has called us to be. So if you're ready to do that, I've got a passage I want to read for you in Scripture. It's from Mark chapter 5. Now, Mark is the second book in the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, right? Mark is the second one. It's the oldest of the 4 Gospels, actually. It was the first one that was written out of the 4. And Mark includes a really fascinating story about an interaction Jesus has with a particular woman. So I want to read the story, and then I want to walk back through and take a look at what Jesus was doing in this person's life and in the community around him when this person was struggling desperately, right? So I'm going to start reading at verse 24 and launch into this idea of what was going on. It says in verse 24 that Jesus went with him. Now, he goes with a guy by the name of Jairus. or Jairus as some people like to call him. He goes with this guy because Jairus has a daughter who is sick. And Jairus has come to Jesus and said, I've heard you're a healer. Can you come and heal my daughter? And it says in verse 24 that Jesus went with him, and all the people followed, crowding around him. A woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal from many doctors, and over the years she had spent everything she had to pay them. But she had gotten no better. In fact, she had gotten worse. She had heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his robe. For she thought to herself, if I can just touch his robe, I will be healed. Immediately the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of her terrible condition. Jesus realized at once that healing power had gone out from him, so he turned around in the crowd and asked, who touched my robe? His disciples said to him, look at this crowd pressing around you. How can you ask who touched me? But he kept on looking around to see who had done it. Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, came and fell on her knees in front of him and told him what she had done. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over. Your suffering is over. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Father, use this word today in our lives. Use it to open us to your ways, to your purposes, to open us up to who you are, how you work, how you operate, and what you want for us in our lives. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. I read you the story because I think it's important to take a look at what Jesus is doing and how he recognizes what's happening in this woman's life and what he wants to do to bring her back around into family and community. So there's this woman, right? Jesus is on his way to Jairus' house, and this woman, there is this woman. It says that she has been struggling physically with what the Bible calls an issue of blood or a flow of blood. Now, let's just be honest with one another. The commentators all know what this means. Everybody, in the context of the language that's used in the original text, the original Greek, we all know what this means. In effect, what this means is that she no longer has a normal menstrual cycle. That every single day of her life, she experiences what every woman in this room experiences once a month. She experiences it every day. And she is there and has been there for 12 years. 12 years, not just 1 week, not just 12 weeks, not 12 days, not 12 months. She has been in this situation of a nonstop flow for 12 years. Can you imagine how exhausted she is? Can you imagine how just worn out physically she is? But she's not just worn out physically, she's worn out emotionally. It says that she was striving to solve the condition, and in doing so, she went from doctor to doctor to try to find a solution. And it says that through her process of going to all these doctors, she actually suffered even more. She suffered humility. She suffered the physical probing. She suffered under the hands of these doctors, and then she had to pay them. And it says she wasn't getting healed, she was getting worse. For 12 long years, she has been struggling with this illness that had nothing to do with her sin, nothing to do with her life. This is happening to her. How many of us feel like we didn't know what was going on? We don't know why this is happening in our life. It's just happening. An illness, a sickness, a situation of some kind. And we're thinking, Lord, what are you going to do? Are you coming soon? Because I could use some relief. And here, this woman is in that situation. And on top of that, see, that's just the physicality of the situation, right? There's more. I want to tell you more because I want you to understand the depth of the struggle this woman is in. Because you see, it's not just physical for her, but she is living in a time prior to the resurrection of Jesus, right? Jesus is still living on the earth, and here Jesus is. He's walking around. He's become the rabbi, the healer, the Messiah for some. And so Jesus hasn't brought the healing into the world through his resurrection that is going to come. He hasn't done the fullness and completeness of the law that is still alive and well. and issued in or ushered in a time of love. Instead, they are living under the age of the law, right? And so they're living under the rules and the laws of Exodus and Numbers and Leviticus and the Old Testament. And in those laws, in those rules, it says, now understand, don't blame me, I didn't create the law. But it basically states that a woman who's going through her menstrual cycle is unclean. That she's unacceptable to be in public, she's unacceptable to go to the synagogue to worship God. She must refrain from doing those things and speaking and touching other people. And so, again, it's not my law, right? Don't blame me. But what she has to do is she has to withdraw from the community. She has to pull herself back away from everyone and do only those things that are necessary to keep her household going. And she can't touch anybody. Because if she touches another person, the rule is in the Old Testament, if you touch a person and you're unclean, then that person is now unclean too. It's like, you know, you go out and you work in the yard right now and you become all nasty, dirty, sweaty, and then you come in and hug your wife. Ooh! And that's how they thought about it. And so she wasn't allowed to touch anyone. No woman is allowed to do that during their menstrual cycle, but she has been in this situation now for how long? Tell me how long? 12 years. Can you imagine? Can you imagine having to withdraw for 12 weeks, for 12 months, for 12 long years? She's been struggling. She's seen doctors. She's tried everything. She's lost a small fortune trying to care for her illness, which is causing her this huge amount of suffering, not just in her physical body, but in her spiritual soul, in her emotional life. She can't touch her husband, can't touch her children, can't touch her friends, can't go out in the public, can't go to the market. I wonder if at some point her family didn't start writing her off. I wonder if she didn't think halfway through that process, maybe somewhere around year 5 or year 6, she may have thought, this isn't living anymore. Maybe I should just end my life. Because this just isn't living. I wonder the depth of the pain she was feeling and how incredible she must have felt to be so distant from everyone. Do you feel where she's at? Can you get a sense of the desperation she must have in her life? Can you get a sense of just how far she might be willing to go to be healed? I get it. I mean, we've all been broken in some place, haven't we? We've all had issues in our lives that just make us feel like, is this ever going to end? Is this ever going to stop? I don't know how I'm going to make it through this. Here's what I know. As a church, and as churches across the world, we don't do a great job when somebody's struggling. You know, the number one thing that a lot of people do when they start struggling in life, the number one thing they do if they're church members is they stop coming to church. I've been around long enough in church to know that if somebody isn't here for a while, it's probably because they're struggling with something. And they don't want anybody to know. And it's just easier to stay away because if somebody says, how you doing, they can't answer honestly without opening a whole can of worms. I also know that the converse exists. That somebody who doesn't go to church, when something in life starts happening, something devastating, something destructive, something painful, they may start coming to church looking for the answers. So I know that when new people walk in, they may be walking in because something's going on. And as a church, and as a family, and as a community, we need to recognize these things in our lives and in the lives of the people around us. We can't just keep thinking everything's okay. Because we all go through struggles and we all go through desperate times of desperation. And it's easy to feel abandoned by the community when the community never says, how you doing? And they really mean it. When the community says, how you doing? But doesn't stick around long enough to find out what the answer is. We can feel that abandonment in the middle of our desperation and wonder if anybody really cares. And because God's people don't care, maybe God doesn't care. I wonder if that's how she felt. I wonder if she felt that abandoned and that lonely and that desperate, because it looks like she does. Because you see, she hears that Jesus is coming by, and she's heard about Jesus. People have been hearing about him now for a while, and he's been healing people and going around and touching people in their lives and having them restored and having them healed. And so she's heard about Jesus, and in her desperation, she's convinced that maybe if I touch even just the edge of his clothing, maybe that healing power that he has will go out of his body and through his clothes and into my life, and I can be healed somehow. And so maybe if I can just touch his cloak, if I can just touch his cloak, if I can just touch his cloak. And she hears that he's coming to town. It says that he gets off of the boat, and they're starting to walk through town. And it says that she makes a decision. That she makes a decision to go after him, to find him. It suggests that she makes her way through the crowd. Some commentators suggest that she probably didn't walk, she probably crawled so that no one would see her. She probably stayed low, crouched, because if someone recognized her, they would know. Everybody knows. It's been 12 years. Everybody knows she's not supposed to be out in public. She's not supposed to be touching everybody. She's not supposed to be in situations where somebody could become unclean because of her uncleanliness. And so she decides to break the law. Decides to break all the rules of the Old Testament and go out into public and try to touch this rabbi. And she's not going to try to touch him physically, because if she touches him, he's going to be unclean. So if I can just grab a part of his robe, maybe. Do you feel how desperate she must be? It's been 12 years. So she starts making her way through the crowd. Not pushing, but just working her way. And it's a crowd of people. She touches the edge of his cloak. And it says at that moment, it says that immediately, instantaneously, she's healed. That she can feel in her body when she reaches out and grabs a hold. She can feel this restoration happening. She can feel the weakness going away. She can feel the flow stop. Can't imagine what she must have felt like. How it must have overwhelmed her for that moment to feel renewed and restored. She hasn't felt like this in how long? 12 years. Have you ever had to endure something for 12 years? I'm not talking about one of your kids. Have you ever had to endure something for that long that has completely shut you away from everyone? So much so that you'd be willing to break the rules to find some sense of healing, some sense of wholeness in your life, coming back into your soul, into your physical body, into your spiritual life. And it says at that moment, when she reaches out and touches him, that she's healed, and that Jesus stops dead in his tracks. He stops there at that moment. It says he actually turns around and says, "Who touched me?" Now the disciples, it says that the disciples said to him, "Look at this crowd pressing around you. How can you ask, 'Who touched me?'" And in effect, what they're saying in modern language is, "What are you thinking? Do you see the crowd around you? This is crazy. Why would you ask that question? You're nuts, dude." I don't know if they said that to Jesus, but that's my translation. I will never, ever go to Disney World on the 4th of July. Ever again. I did it once. Scott and Joanne Stoner were getting married, and they asked me to fly down to Orlando and do the wedding on the 4th of July. And I said, "Orlando, I'm there," right? Never again. There was such a crowd that you couldn't move around the park. Every way was blocked. I remember that feeling of not being able to get out because there were people everywhere. I had the same feeling on the streets of New York City once. Julie and I were in New York City, and they were doing some construction on the road, on the street, and so they had funneled everybody on the sidewalk down to this very narrow piece. And I don't know if you know Times Square at all, but that's exactly where it was. And so this wide sidewalk was now narrowed down to about the space of side by side. And I'm convinced that there were some people who just lifted their feet and went along with the crowd. Because there were that many, and it was that tight. And for the first time in my life, and the only time in my life I've ever felt this feeling like, grab me a paper bag, I'm going to hyperventilate. This is not good. I don't feel good about being here right now. That's the kind of crowd. You get the picture? That's the kind of thing that's going on. And Jesus is surrounded because people want to be around this man who can do miracles. And so they've crowded around him, and he stops and he says, "Who touched me?" And he's not talking about who bumped into me, who keeps rubbing up against me. He's talking about who just took some of the healing power from my life and received it into their lives, who just got transformed, who just got healthy, who just got restored, who just got renewed. I don't know about you. I want to touch Jesus and get some of that. Jesus stops dead in his tracks and says, "Who just touched me?" And in her shame, because you see, that's what this kind of suffering could lead to, right? It leads to shame, doesn't it? When we're struggling and we're suffering, oftentimes we don't share it with somebody else because we feel shame. We feel like, well, I messed up and my kids didn't turn out well, or I lost my job because I said the wrong thing, and we're just embarrassed and we're shamed. So we don't tell anybody because we don't want anybody to know how ashamed we feel. But in her shame, she comes over to Jesus, and it says that she can't even look him in the face. It says she gets down on her hands and knees, and she doesn't look up at him, but instead she just says to him, "It was me. It was me." Can't imagine how she was feeling in the middle of feeling all of that restoration, feeling her health coming back, feeling restored, renewed. She bows down before him and says, "It was me." Jesus does something amazing. Jesus, I want you to hear this. Jesus does something amazing. He calls her. He calls her out. It says here in verse 33, "Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what happened to her, came and fell on her knees in front of him and told him what she had done. And he says to her," listen to this, I don't want you to miss this. He says to her, "Daughter." He calls her daughter. He calls her by family and brings her back in, recognizing her position and her place as one of his daughters. As the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, as the creator of all things, to him she is not lost. To him she is not far. To him she has not been abandoned. To him she is a daughter. And she's back. She's back in the kingdom. She's back in the family. I can't imagine what it must have felt like for the chains of loneliness to be dropping off of her that day, to be restored back into the family. You see, the fear of rejection is like chains around us, right? We don't want to admit any of our difficulties, any of our struggles to anybody because we're afraid they'll reject us. And that day, he didn't reject her at all. Instead, he advanced her back into the position of daughter, didn't he? For 12 long years, she had been that woman, that person, not a daughter, not anything else. As a matter of fact, I want you to notice something that I think is unique. I'm going to take a rabbit trail for just a moment, so I want you to stay with me. But I want you to see something very unique here that I think Jesus, in the process of restoring her in one place, restored her over into another place. So I want you to notice, how many years had she suffered with this? Tell me. Okay, 12 years, right? 12 years. You've got this, right? You know the situation. You're starting to feel the depth of all that's going on. But listen to something else. It says that he goes on, he's going to keep making his way onto Jairus' house. But it says a messenger comes from Jairus' house and stops Jairus and says, don't trouble the master anymore because your daughter's already dead. And Jesus continues to her house, to the daughter's house, to Jairus' house. He keeps going because he knows that he has power over death, right? Death is not going to stop him, right? So he's not worried about this girl who's died. He's already making his way there. But I want you to see something. He restores the daughter to life. He walks into the house and says, why is all this commotion and weeping? The child isn't dead. She's only asleep. And the crowd, in wonderment, laughs at him and says, you're crazy, man. We know death when we see it. And he goes to the bedroom and he says to her, by holding her hand, he tells her to get up. And she comes back to life. But look what it says in verse 42. It says, and the girl who was 12 years old. I wonder if this woman isn't this girl's mom. And the flow started when she gave birth. We know that giving birth can cause all kinds of trouble, right? And we know that medicine doesn't exist like it does today, and surgeries don't exist like they do today. And I wonder in my mind and in my heart, I wonder if this isn't, I wonder if it's a woman who had not just had to step back from society, but she had to stop being mom because she couldn't touch her own child because she was unclean. And now her child's laying in her sick bed. Her husband has nothing to do with her because he can't touch her anymore and hasn't been able to for 12 years. And all of a sudden, Jesus doesn't just restore her to daughter, but he restores her to mom again. I wonder if Jesus isn't doing more than we even see in this picture. I wonder if Mark doesn't tell us that it's been 12 years for her and this girl just happens to be 12 years old. I wonder. Jesus is restoring her to not just her own family, but to the entire community and bringing her back to being the proud mother that she's always wanted to be. To be a daughter of the King of Kings and the mom and maybe even wife. I wonder. You see, what Jesus does oftentimes on one level looks like just one thing, but Jesus is never doing just one thing, is he? The ripple effect of what God does in our lives when he brings healing into our lives. This is trashing me, I'm sorry. Just the thought of all this, right? Wow. To think that when Jesus brings that kind of healing into our lives, it's systemic. It goes out into every piece and every part of who we are, affecting everything that has caused us to be disconnected and to feel that abandonment and loneliness. And he restores her to daughter and wife and mother. Wow. So, saying to her, look, I know the community hasn't been a good place for you. I know that your home hasn't been a good place to you, but you've come to me and I'm safe. This is a safe place, and you can come here and you can see healing and you can see recovery and you can be restored and renewed in your life. How many of us need a safe place where we can say, Jesus, I'm not good right now. I need you. And in coming to the safe place of Jesus, he also brings her into a place of community. Jesus is a safe place we need to get to. Jesus is a place we need to come to see that healing and see that restoring power. And in so doing, he brings us back into community. That's our next note. Brings us back into the community that we would love to have happen. And look, I got to tell you something. God has called us to be the place where we can be that for one another. That we can bring that healing and restoration, bring that wholeness and community back into people's lives. That we can be his hands and feet. That we can touch one another. I don't know what you came in here with today. I don't know if you've ever felt like this woman. I don't know if you've ever come close. Most of us probably have at some point in our life. And maybe you're not there right now, but you know what it feels like because you've been there. You know the depth of hurt, and you know the struggle. I think we've all been there. some level. And so this morning, I just want to say something to you. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay to hurt. It's okay to struggle. It's okay to feel bad. It's all right with us. It's okay. We can handle it. We can do this together. We can be a community together. If you're struggling today, if you brought something in here today and it's just weighing heavy on you, then maybe you, like me and like the rest of us in this room, maybe you just need to grab a hold. Say, if I can just grab a hold of some Jesus, I think I can be better. I think I can be healed. I think I can be restored. I think I can be renewed. I think maybe he can bring me back to life. And let me say this to you. One last thing I want to say before we wrap up. I want you to take this home and look. It may feel like you're the only one going through whatever it is you're going through. It may feel like you're the only one who struggles, that your struggle is yours and yours to carry alone. But I'm here to tell you, based on this passage, you are never alone. Ever. That he walks with you every single day, that you never walk alone, that you never go anywhere alone, and he's always with you. The scriptures say that to us, the Bible says that he never sleeps, so it doesn't matter what hour you're up walking the floors. It doesn't matter what you're going through or what place you're going through, that you can't go far enough to get away from him, because he's always there. And so whatever it is you're going through this morning, whatever struggle, whatever burden, whatever difficulty, whatever challenge that might be happening in your life, I think probably like me, you just need to reach out and say, I need you, Jesus. If I can just touch you. So this morning, I want to give you a chance to say that to him. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to give you a chance to talk to God. I don't know what it is that you need to talk to him about, but you do. You know exactly what it is. And so I'm going to give you a moment for a conversation with him. If you just want to bow your head and close your eyes and just sort of cancel out the fact that you're here with somebody else or that anybody else is in this room. It's just you in this room by yourself with him. And whatever it is you need to tell him right now, in the quietness of your mind and heart, take a moment and talk to him.